Good evening, everyone. I'm Sonia Chandel, and on behalf of Punjab University Alumni Association, I welcome all friends today to this webinar on Mughal jewelry. As a host, I will also be moderating your questions. So whatever questions you have, please type them on the chat box. Your questions will be taken up after our guest speaker's presentation. I request you to keep your videos off and microphones on during the presentation. Now, let me welcome and introduce our very special speaker of the day. Dr. Nafisa Syed Motiwala is multi-talented. She's an artist, she's an author, she's a speaker, and she's also an educator. For her art, she has been awarded the prestigious Ratne Hind Award for Excellence in Abstract Art. And she is based in Canada and has authored a book, Mughal Jewelry, An Insight to the Jewelry Under the Mughals. I see that some students are there from our history department, and you will be interested to know that Dr. Nafisa has done her PhD in history of art with specialization in regional architecture of tombs and mosques in Madhya Pradesh. Dr. Motiwala, a very warm welcome to you. Thank you for preparing the lecture for us. Over to you, Dr. Nafisa.
Thank you, Sonia. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dr. Nafisa Syed Motiwala, and I would be presenting today on Mughal jewelry, techniques, opulence, and modern impact. So let's start. So let's begin with the techniques. Thing that we all know from time immemorial has been documented either through paintings or sculptures, and been there different types or in different ages. It has taken different shapes, different designs have been there, techniques have been there, and we also see that there might be a variation. Probably the royalty or the higher class might wear jewelry that is has precious golds or metals such as gold, whereas the lower society or the humbler strata would be wearing something gold such as lac, brass, or silver. But jewelry is something that everyone or every person with us wears, and there might be a difference in terms of the designs. The basics form also usually are the same, but definitely with the influence of the and the regional impact, they do undergo a change. We can see there are four paintings, and the first one being of Emperor Jahangir, where he's adorned with jewelry from turban, neck, his hand bracelets, and even he's holding an ornament. And the next one being the next section, his wife, his consort, Noor Jahan. The first one being all the different kinds of jewelry. So we see that how much detail was given and how detailed and importance was given to the jewelry, that even in the paintings, the miniature paintings, we find such exquisite, such fine details have been given. An interesting thing, if we see in the third painting, we see that in the third picture as well, we have Noor Jahan, but the kind of jewelry that she wears is a bit different from the wearing a turban and the turban jewelry, which was more closely associated with something that an emperor would wear. Now, at this point of time, it also showed the political power. And we all know, like especially the history students would know, that Noor Jahan was equally powerful and had a political influence like her husband, Emperor Jahangir. And that's why when we see her being dressed or portrayed as with wearing a turban and all the jewels that we would usually associate with emperor, we understand that how powerful, how influential she was in that era. Last one, I'm sure many of you will be familiar with. It's taken from the book cover of the very famous book, The Last Emperor, from William Dalrymple. And we can see that portrayal of the last emperor, Mughal emperor, Bahadur Shah Zafar II, although at that point of time he was just namesake ruler, but we see that the kind of adornment, the jewelry that he's wearing, defines defines his regalia. He defines that, being an emperor. So all these jewelry was just not simply worn for jewelry, but definitely had religious. It had superstitious reasons such as the amulet jewelry, and in this case we see that it signified the power of the wearer. So the kind of jewelry that you wear, the way that you wore the jewelry, the kind of stones or the metal that you use, signifying the kind of the political, the social status that you had in the society. Now, coming to the techniques of different techniques that were used to make Mughal jewelry, there are many, but 7 of the most important ones are enamling or meenakari, kundan, filgari, thappa, casting, and engraving. Sorry. Meenakari was basically coloring or painting of the metal surfaces and ceramic tiles through enameling as an art form and commercially produced mainly in Iran, India, and Pakistan. Now we see that enameling is believed to be introduced in Jaipur, one of the prime centers of enameling by by Raja Man Singh of and where he invited the skilled laborers from Lahore. And ever since then, it has become an integral part of Jaipur. And if you are traveling to Jaipur, you would definitely find shops selling meenakari being as an important part culture and the center. The second one being Kundan. Now, Kundan jewelry is basically the traditional form of Indian art, and it's a set with a gold foil between the stones, and its mount usually for elaborate necklaces. The word Kundan itself means highly refined gold, and a highly refined and pure form of molten gold was used to make that. Now, Kundan and enameling were often used together because it was believed that through enameling, you could test the quality of gold. So, the purer the gold, the brighter the enamel. And since Kundan made, the back of the Kundan jewelry was basically plain, and enameling intensified the beauty or beautified the back as well. Slowly and gradually, they became inseparable, and we find that most of the Kundan jewelry that we find has enameling on the back. And some of the fine examples of Kundan we can from Bikaner and Jaipur. The third one being filigree. Is a delicate embellishment in infallible threads of precious metal are twisted, curled into a design, and then soldered onto or into the jewelry. These designs can take the shape of gorgeous scroll work, lacy florals, symmetrical Art Deco style designs, and other fascinating motifs. Usually, silver wires were used to accomplish patterns for bangles, bracelets, and even earrings. And many of us would find that our grandmothers would definitely have one set of that either in gold or silver. And not only used in jewelry, but is also reflective in the architecture, where we find the lattice work in the windows, where we have, or the jali work that we refer as. It is very similar and quite inspired by this ornamentation. To Theva technique. Now, Theva technique is most often commonly misinterpreted with enameling because of its appearance. Now, when we see it's a colored glass and has something similar, so it's mostly confused with enameling. Now, Theva technique can primarily be understood as encasing of colored glass by a frame of gold. The most common colors used were red, blue, and green. The technique is primarily practiced by the artisans in Pratapgarh and Ratlam for generations. In fact, these are the prime centers of Theva technique even now. And the artisans produce extraordinary objects that serve ornamental as well as utility purpose using this technique. In fact, this technique was revived about a decade ago, uh, where the court and some of the designers revived it by employing the Theva artisans, because this is a technique that was passed down from generation in the family, and only a family member could learn it. So they would not teach anyone from outside. So that's the reason why it wasn't as popular. But luckily, with the initiatives of the cottage industries, the artists were facilitated, and they are now exhibiting in a lot of the events and exhibitions, such as if you have ever been to Crafts Museum in Delhi, you would find that many a times you do have exhibition and events where these artists are creating their work live and also selling. So it's something very interesting because it requires a lot of expertise, because the pattern that is there, the gold pattern, is basically a gold leaf, and it takes a lot of expertise to make the fine patterns that it has. The Thappa technique. Now, this technique involves the molten metal to be hammered into a desired shape. That was an ideal option to prepare solid or close ornaments. So this is something very simple, or a technique that has evolved from many years, and it is something that was present on almost most of the eras, because something similar, something even now we do have designers and jewelers that technique to create something that is simple, something that is more usable for daily wear. Sixth one being the casting technique. The casting technique is a part of the jewelry creation process, and it allows designers and jewelry stores to take an idea or design, create a mold, and eventually end up with a physical reproduction of the final product. The gold casting process involves the following techniques, such as wax mold and casting preparation. This technique could be dated to the Indus Valley civilization, because we do have evidence of holes that have been found. This again is a technique that has evolved over the years, and we do find evidences of a casting technique that we have even now. Seventh and the most interesting one is the engraving technique. Now, the engraving technique basically was where the gemstones were engraved for ornamentation, a technique that was used popularly during the Mughal period, because it acted as a propaganda items that were indicative of its wearer. In fact, the present image in the slide, it is referred to as the Emerald of Shah Jahan, since his name was engraved on it. And not only names, but we do find stones that have engraving or a portrait of the emperor, because it signified the importance, the power of the wearer. So we do find examples in emerald as well as jade because the hard stones. This is something very popular, and many of us would be familiar with. This is the Navratna. Now, the Mughals adopted several local customs and traditions, and one of them was example is the use of Navratna as an ornament. Now, the precious nine gems are also known as the planetary stones or the birthstones because they're associated with planet and a specific duration. The nine precious stones are ruby, pearl, yellow diamond, emerald, blue sapphire, red coral, garnet, and cat's eye. Sun referred is associated with ruby, pearl, Mars with red coral, Jupiter with yellow sapphire, Mercury with emerald and diamond, Saturn with blue sapphire, Rahu with Gomet or garnet, and Ketu with cat's eye. And they correspond to different wavelengths associated with these. And we see this in this image, we see that the importance that we have as a cultural value that we have in the Indian society. This is basically Indian postal stamp under the category of gems and jewelry. And we see an image, it was used because, and as a postal stamp, it was used. So we see the importance of it in our cultural development. Now, coming to opulence. With the advent of the Mughals, the craft got a fresh vitality that added to the creativity of the Indian artisans, to the level of sophistication achieved under the patronage. Now, the jewelry served as ornament as well as indicated the wearer's power, like we discussed earlier. Now, in accordance with the then local customs, the high-ranking officials in the Mughal court gifted jewelry and precious jewels as a symbol of royal favor. And this is an image of sarpej, that was a turban ornament that we find using even now for during the wedding. And other, you would see that it is yet again a postal stamp, Indian postal stamp, and another of gems and jewelry. And we can see the elaborate or line of this with the help of the strings. This was tied to the turban. See the use of emeralds and the kind of was used. Now, this painting exquisitely is a detailed painting in film created for the Emperor Jahangir of the Mughal Empire. And it shows a ceremony initiated by Jahangir's father, Akbar the Great. In this ceremony, in this painting, we can see that the prince is being weighed against metals and gifts. It basically was a ceremony where twice a year, on the first day of the solar and lunar years, at an hour calculated.
You can carry on.
Okay. So twice a year, on the first day of solar and lunar years, at an hour calculated by the court astrologers, the emperor himself or one of his sons would be weighed in a great balance against gold, silver, or other metals to be given away to the poor as charity. In addition to the precious metal, trays of textiles were also laid out on a cloth to be given as gifts. The ceremony was witnessed by attendants of the court and other dignitaries, while we can see that the officials held the ropes of the scale and recited blessings and prayer for the sun. In fact, even this can be also found in the memoirs of Jahangir. He testifies the love of jewels under the Mughals and his keen attention given to the adornment. He accounts a gift to his son Khurram, later Emperor Shah Jahan, a jewel charab that was a piece of clothing, the fringe and the collar of which were adorned with pearls, an Iraqi horse, a jewel dagger, and so on and so forth. So we do see that it was not only that the local or the commoners that were giving gifts to the emperor or the sovereign, but it was also on a personal level. They gave and the adornment or the kind of jewelry that extended not only to what you would wear, but also to daggers and other items.
Dr. Nafisa, if your slide is not moving ahead, I can share your PPT on my screen.
Okay.
Should I share my screen?
Yes, please, because it's not moving. It seems to be stuck.
Okay, no problem. You stop sharing and start sharing. Okay.
Okay.
Unmute myself first.
Okay.
Just a minute.
Sure.
Which slide were you on?
This one.
Okay. I'll move to screen and just tell me whenever you have to move the next slide. Okay.
All right.
Just let me move to screen.
We were on the next slide.
This one. Okay.
Yeah, that's right.
But it's not taking full screen.
This one only. This one.
Yeah. I'll go like this. Is it coming full screen for you?
Yes, it's visible. If you can put it on full screen.
Not doing. I did F5. Okay, we'll proceed like this then.
All right. All right. Do you want me to try my slide?
If it is working fine, otherwise we can continue like this. Is it working fine for you?
Okay, I think it's working fine. All right. So in this painting, we do see Raja Bikramajit Singh and Afzal Khan with the trays of jewels and to be presented to one of the rulers. And because gems were a means to show their wealth and a sign of glamour. So this practice of giving gifts to the sovereign ensured that there was a constant flow of money. And this also indicated a form of indirect taxation.
Sorry, I just managed to do a full screen and it went to the first slide. I'm doing
No
it.
worries.
Don't worry. it happens.
No worries. It's okay.
It's
It's
good
fine.
to be able to see the beautiful pictures again. Just tell me when to stop.
Sure. The next.
This one. Okay.
That's it. That's it. That's it. All right. So yeah, so we were discussing that this painting, basically, the two gentlemen that are here, they are one is Afzal Khan and Raja Bikramajit Singh, and they are depicted with gifts and jewels. Since this was a common practice to gift jewels and stones and gems, because gems were a means to show their wealth and glamour, and it was a popular custom to gift gems or jewelry or expensive things, gifts to the sovereign, because it ensured the constant flow of money or wealth. Apart from that, it was also an means of indirect taxation. Not that the emperors did not gift, but definitely they were reciprocated higher in value. So if they gave gifts, they were reciprocated with gifts that were more in value or higher in value. So this is just an image that just gives a glimpse of that. And we can see that there are daggers as well. So we have jewels, we have daggers that were decorated, and some other utility items that are there in this picture. Next slide, please. Now, this is an interesting slide where you have two images that have been taken from Ain-e-Akbari. Now, the artists and the craftsmen that we see, they were a part of the inner Mughal coterie. That means they were integral part of the Mughal household, where you had karkhanas to accomplish imperial orders. The craftsmen and artisans who were exemplary or were expert in the fields, they got under Mughals, so much so that they traveled with the emperor, not only on expeditions but pleasure trips to various parts in the country, and this was practiced along the painters, the jewelers, to capture the essence, of flora and fauna that could be further incorporated in their work of art. And the craftsmen here, it's important that the craftsmen were not only invited from different parts of India, but they were also invited from different countries of the world, primarily like Italy, Turkey, and England as well. And to accomplish imperial order, so depending upon what kind of, because they also like wanted to try out something new, some new designs, so they invited them to accomplish orders that were specific to the pattern or design that they desired. And depending upon the ability and the craftsmanship of these artists and craftsmen, they were awarded, and they were even documented. We will later see that these, because we have references of goldsmiths, enamelers or meenakar that have been described in Ain-e-Akbari as well as Akbarnama. Now, an interesting account is also that you show illustrations of dancers both wearing differentiated styles of jewelry in accordance to their origins. So jewelry was was documented in their literary sources, in the state chronicles and all the other important documents. We also see that in Ain-e-Akbari we do find a reference where we find that this was the craftsmen. There was a whole team of craftsmen that was headed by a daroga or a superintendent, and included different jewelers. Now, these jewelers in this image, like we can see, now they were responsible for safekeeping the jewels. So it was just not that they create and they keep it, but there was a whole process of safekeeping them, of accounting them, of cataloging them. And like in the modern times, we have the inventory, that is handled by the logistics departments. So there was a whole process of inventory, and they divided all these skilled artisans and jewelers they sorted out jewels, and usually diamonds, emeralds, and ruby, the precious stones, they were classified into two categories, two classes, and sorted out and kept separately. And whereas the pearl was classified in 16 categories. Now these were strung in wire or in a thread, and each of the pearl was accounted, the details, and later on they were stamped with the royal seal, because just to make sure that they are, after sorting, they are not mixed up with the other gems. And so there was a whole detailed way of dealing with them, a whole inventory that was maintained for these jewelry. So we do see that it was such an important and an integral part of their lifestyle. So it was just not just something that would be there for a purpose or aesthetic beauty or just a value, but also there was a lot of painstaking efforts that were taken to make it, to save it, and so on and so forth. Now so, and the next picture is of the different kinds of jewelry that we find. So although it might not be a bit clear, but this is an actual image from Ainagri, where we find different parts of like jewelry from different parts. So the whole, from head to toe, there were different jewelries, and jewelry was not only specific for women, but for men also. So you had the binda, like we have here, or jhumar. So for men we had the turban jewelry, we had the armbands, the wristbands. All these were both for men and for women. So this image basically gives us an idea as to the different kinds and the categories of jewelry that were there for different parts of the body. Thank you. Now, in this slide, we see that its utility meets ornamentation. So in the previous slide, where we saw Raja Bikramjit Singh and Afzal Khan presenting, we saw these ornamented daggers as well. So here again, we see that something like daggers that had a utility purpose, because they had to keep for security purpose, and all the officials had it with them. So the daggers were also not spared from ornamentation, and we find at the hilt or the top of the dagger, as well as the sword, we do have some kind of decoration that gave it an aesthetic value. So they were not only used for a purpose of for utility, but something, if they kept it with them, it also added to the beauty, added to the aesthetic value. The next one in the same slide, we have the zehgi, or the thumb ring. This ring was used by archers to protect their thumb from getting injured when they were using bow and arrow. But eventually, over the course of time, we can see that there are two examples. So the first one, the bottom one with the black, that appears black in black stone. So this was something that was initially used. But we see over the period of time that how you had inscriptions written on it, incrustation of the stones, and other techniques that were used to ornament it, because this again was worn, and nowadays it's a trend to wear a thumb ring. We find many different designs and patterns. So this is something like an origin, that how it served as a utility purpose, but eventually it became so ornamented that we don't realize that what was the exact origin of this. Okay, next one, please. So we see that the influence there was on utensils as well. So utensils also we see not simply just to eat, but you see that they were made in hard stones, encrusted. Even if it was a glassware, they were decorated with gold foil. And so we see that ornamentation was just a part of their whole lifestyle, a whole part of, and how much patronage that they gave, how much the craftsmen, how they were skilled, they were given patronage, they were given the encouragement, that all these ideas, like you can see the spoon on one side, how the spoon is decorated, whereas there's a whole box where you keep your cutlery with a knife, spoon, the extender of the spoon, how everything is so ornamented, so decorated, that it almost appears to be as a part, a jewelry. Next one, please.
It's taking time, but I have already seen the
Okay.
slide.
Okay. So here are a few examples of the influence on architecture, like previously discussed. Filigree had an influence on architecture in the form of lattice work, where you had where jari-like pattern was, or a grill-like pattern was um, recreated on a hard surface such as marble. Here also we see the kind of motifs, the patterns we see with the inlay work, the tile work. We see how they were ornamented, how beautiful they are, like the floral patterns, the use of colors, different colors, the use of different designs and motifs we see on the ceilings, as well as the wall panels, and even on some of the furniture also we find that. So most of the motives were floral, like we saw earlier, inclusive of scrolling vines and often animative too. The floral design is amongst the most admired motif in Indian jewelry, and we also find that same in the Mughal jewelry. And one such pattern or motif was the champa or jasmine. And in fact, most of the ear ornaments and ring ornaments were shaped in the form of flower that was ornamented with different techniques. And the Mughals, it was a melting point of different cultures. It was a different cultures, and we do see different patterns that were there, such as fish motive. We find birds. We and all influence from religion as well as the natural surroundings. And so we see that there was no dearth of motive that were there. So the craftsmen were given encouragement and the liberty to be inspired from the surrounding. So we do see a different kinds of motifs that were used. Birds were used, and most the earrings were shaped in the form of flower, and use of birds, animals as motifs was quite popular. And we do see the animative symbolism was influenced by religious and superstitious beliefs, such as serpent, fish, peacock, too were used as a part of jewelry. Now, serpent signified the quick potency and the eternity of cyclic time course, of course, was uh, also denoted fertility and was an incarnation of Lord Vishnu. Then we find the peacock. Peacock, that was an important one. It was not only represented beauty but immortality as well.
Next slide.
Yes, you can go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So we see that Mughal jewelry and its prototype also made its way to the cinema, and we do find the cinematic appearance on many occasions in some of the movies of the yesteryear, such as Pakiza and Mughal-e-Azam. That you would be able to identify with it, or even the recent Jodha Akbar. So the kind of jewelry and you would see, and the kind of costume, the colors, it all coordinated. It's like a prototype where you see that you get a glimpse or get a rough idea as to what kind of jewelry they were, what kind of patterns, how they made sure that it added to your clothing, it added to be a part of it, and how it matched with the personality of the wearer.
Next slide.
Next slide, please. So this is Kohinoor, and did you know that Kohinoor was once a part of the Mughal treasury? Exactly, that's true. Before it became a part of the Royal British Crown, it was definitely in India and a part of the Mughal treasury for a long time. And Kohinoor diamond basically means the mountain of light. That is, Ko is means mountain and Noor being light. So the mountain of light, and it is now 106 carat diamond, and one of the largest diamond in the world. The first reference we find of Kohinoor is in the Memoirs of Babur, where he mentions it as among the treasures of Alauddin in 1304. And we do find that in 1526, after the defeat of the Lodhis in the Battle of Panipat, it was handed over to the Mughals. And ever since then, it was a part of the Mughal treasury. In fact, it was said that originally it weighed 793 carats, but due to some cutting and polishing by the emperor's jeweler, Borgio, the stone was reduced to just 186 carats. Of course, that for that he was severely punished as well. And previously from before Mughals, it belonged to various rulers in India, and today, of course, it lies in the hands of the British royal family and is a part of the crown jewels. Now, because its history involves a great deal of fighting between men, the Kohinoor has assumed a reputation with the British royal family that it is only worn by the women or the female members of the royal family. And it was first set in the Queen a brooch and a circuit of Queen Victoria, and after death in 1901, it was set in the crown of Queen Alexandria, wife of Edward VII. Then it was transferred to the crown of Queen Mary in 1911, and finally to the crown queen of Queen Elizabeth, later known as Queen Mother, in 1937 for her coronation as Queen Consort. Now, this today, at present, the diamond is on public display at the Jewel House of Tower of London, and where it is seen by millions of visitors each year. The government of India, Pakistan, Iran, and Afghanistan have all claimed for its rightful ownership of Kohinoor and demanded to be handed over or returned ever since India gained independence in 1947. However, the British government insists that the gem was obtained legally under the last Treaty of Lahore in 1849, where we do find that there was a term that said that Maharaja Dalip Singh had handed over the gem to the royal to the British crown, and that's why this is one argument where the British Prime Minister and the British officials have rejected the claims to return the Kohinoor. And yet again, you can see on one side you have the image of the Kohinoor, and on the other side how it is a part of the royal crown. And this is also a part of it. This is not the whole Kohinoor. It is just a part of it that was reduced to fit in the crown. So the other part is there visible for the visitors to see. Next slide, please. So now we see that the modern impact that we have and how do we find it at present. Now, I'm sure that the designer Sabyasachi Mukherjee needs no introduction, as he's a well-known name in the fashion industry, and his brand is quite popular, and he is frequently endorsed by celebrities such as the Bride of Sabyasachi, where you have Anushka Sharma, Sohali Khan Patodi, Bipasha Basu, just to name a few. And in fact, there was a show also that used to come some years ago. And here we see that how it is influenced. Of course, we will not see the exact or the opulence, but we do see that how it is recreated with the use of the stones, the use of the patterns, how it is to recreate like the jhumar with the strings, the pearl strings, the kind of turban jewelry. All these are recreated to give that aura and the resemblance. And we do see that it is quite popular. Of course, it is quite popular, and we see more and more people, being inspired by this. And there are other designers as well. Next slide, please. Here we have Renu Manjunath. She is the founder, she's an iconic founder of Labor based in Dubai. And we do see that her patterns, her jewelry, of course, the brand is quite a popular brand in the region, in the Middle East. And we do see that, the kind of jewelry, the patterns, here we again see that this is an earring that is it's inspired by Juma, the ear, the pearl strings, and the filigree that is down below. So we do see that the legacy of Mughal jewelry continues, and we do find it that we will find it amongst designers like and fashion brands like Renu Manjunath's label RM, Sabyasachi, and many other designers who have given the impetus and continue to be influenced and give us something lovely and aesthetic that we can cherish and make it a part of our own treasury. Next slide. Thank you everyone for attending the webinar, and I would also like to thank Punjab University Alumni Association for organizing this webinar. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Nafisa, but you're not done yet. We are not going to let you go so easily because we have a lot of questions
Sure.
from the audience, and I also want to ask. And thank you for this interesting topic and this interesting lecture. First of all, tell us, how did you get interested in jewelry?
Well, since I was, I did my master's in art history or history of art from National Museum Institute. So being a student, we always had access to books on jewelry and the collection and galleries of national museums. And off and on, we had exhibitions such as the Nizam Jewels. So we were always intrigued, and as students, we got the benefit and the privilege to see these specimens in live and actually see how they appeared. And as we started studying and researching, it definitely caught my interest, and that's how I got into researching about Mughal jewelry.
So you also own some pieces of Mughal jewelry?
Well, yes, something like this that I'm wearing as of now, and
the video is not coming that clear on my side. I don't know whether the audience can see it, but looks good. Okay, there's a question from Anu H. Gupta. Does making of Theva jewelry involve using any other material than gold? Another material than gold?
Theva jewelry is basically you need it involves the glass colored glass, and it's not gold as in gold like you have it's basically a thin sheet like we have the varak or the gold foil. So it is not that thin, but it is that you can make like you have the aluminum foil where you can actually kind of cut out a shape. So it is a gold leaf, not exactly gold. And the kind of the glass that we require, the glass also we need to require, and of course different tools that are made sure to encase it. And like, depending upon the pattern or the shape, it may not require. So if you are only for theva, probably only gold leaf and the glass pattern might be required. But if you are making it into a jewelry with certain stones or everything, then it might require more.
Okay, thank you. And there's a question from Shreya. In the case of Theva jewelry, as you spoke, that only family members can learn it. I want to
Yes.
ask you whether this technique came to India after the Mughals entered India, or did it exist before them? If this technique existed before the Mughals, then it is an Indian technique of making jewelry.
Okay, so there is actually not a clear source of like where it originated from, because we do have examples of European wine glasses and cups that have something similar to this. So it is what is accounted, the evidence that we have is that it was something that, like, we have exchange of gifts, like we talked about. So probably it was kind of an exchange of gifts where the artisans were inspired, and broken pieces of glasses, they kind of experimented with this and came up with something like that. So we don't find any evidence as of that, but we of Theva preceding Mughals, but we do find that it did originate, and it did stay here with artists in the Rajputana area, where the Pratapgarh, which is on the border of Madhya Pradesh and Rajasthan, and Ratlam. So they are there, and since it is handed over from generation, like family members, even the no one from outside is encouraged. They will not tell also, because I when I was researching, I also tried to ask, but they are so particular on this. They will not share it even with their wives or daughters, because with that it will go on to the other family. So it is such a tight, secret kind of technique that is kept within the family, and that is why it was on the verge of disappearing, where the cottage industry took initiative of recognizing the artist for it.
Okay, related to this is another question that as it is also from Anu Achutta, that as our artisans were invited from various countries, so I wonder, was there an exchange of ideas, designs, and materials?
Of course, of course, of course, we do find that there was an exchange of artisans, craftsmen, painters as well. So definitely, there was inspiration, because we find, like in painting, we find that there was introduction of allegory, or kind of using um, different kind of medium, different kind of object. So for artisans as well, because artisans always wanted patronage, and they would always like to be patronized, because if they are patronized by someone who is wealthy, who can afford, who can encourage them, they themselves would get ideas, or they will get a chance to experiment more. So definitely it was that if they are coming from, like, most of the jewelry that was there, like kundan and this one, what you call, enameling, like, was mostly coming from Rajasthan region. So if the artists are encouraged and given patronage, because they were not only given patronage, they were paid well as well. Okay, because it they required, and being in the royal karkhanas meant that your status, royal status, is also elevated. So yes.
Okay, there's a question from Ms. Shabnam Sen. He says, where can we find good Mughal jewelry, and do you know any places in Delhi?
If you're looking for the real specimens, you can find it in National Museum, Victoria and Albert Museum in
I think she
UK.
wants to purchase it.
Purchase it. You can purchase it. You can have your Sabyasachi is there. There are designers such as Reena Aluwalia is there online. You have many designers in Bombay. So it's not something specific. So if you want to go for higher end, you can of course contact Sabyasachi. They have a whole website on that. Otherwise, there are many designers you can find online. So it should not be a hard this thing. And nowadays, you find a lot of designers, using those kinds of elements that replicate it.
Yes, when I was researching for interviewing you, I found that even Kalyan Jewelers make
Oh
Mughal.
yes, yes.
Very
Kalyan Jewelers and Damas also you have. Damas also you have. So yes, you can find that there also.
okay. Now, Veena Sachdeva says it's a wonderful presentation. Thank you,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
We find that Jahangir started getting animals and birds painted. Do you find these motifs used during Akbar's time on jewelry?
Yes, of course, we find like the question that you asked previously that the artists, if they came, artists when they came, were they influenced or there was an exchange? Because Theva jewelry, okay, Theva. Let me just uh, focus on that. The Theva jewelry initially the motives that were used, they were. Because it came from Rajasthan, so it was Nathwaji, all these the religious themes were taken to depict it. But as it came towards, depending upon the patron, depending upon the region, they did evolve, they did adapt. So when we talk about the birds, yes, it was under Akbar also, but under Jahangir, it got more value because Jahangir himself was, he was an artist. He was so well versed that he could identify that, the different artists, how and what they did. If you remember that I had mentioned that, he had mentioned in his memoirs about the different gifts and jewels. So there was a whole, it was there in Akbar, but in Jahangir we find more references of it.
Dr. Nafisa, the thing is, there are a lot of questions still, and
Okay.
I will try to ask. I will try to cover all the questions. But let's see. So, Dr. Lab Singh, good evening, sir. One of my favorite alumni members has asked, how has Punjabi culture influenced jewelry art? Uh, how has Punjabi culture influenced art or jewelry, like designs in jewelry?
See, I mean, most of the time, because when we see the artisans coming, most of them, the original or the they got merged and got adapted when when they went into a different region. When we talk about Punjabi culture and how it has influenced jewelry, we find in terms of the kind of bracelets that we have, the kind of opulence, the different vibrant colors of the textiles that we have in Fulkari. Okay, so the different patterns that we have in bangles and earrings, all these definitely you that this came from Punjab, this came from Rajasthan, but it all got infused and it got adapted. So it was like, it was a melting pot of culture. So you have different things because the officials who were there, so they were from different, different parts of the country, and with them, with the matrimonial alliances of and friendly alliances of Mughals with the other rulers, definitely artists did come and did infuse. So yes, there was influence when we talk about the in terms of the kind of the bracelets or the karas and all these the elaborate designs.
Okay, one last question, Dr. Nafisa. You mentioned Jodha Akbar also. So, can you hear me?
Yeah.
You mentioned Jodha Akbar. So, is there any influence, vice versa, of the jewelry, the Mughal jewelry and the Rajputana jewelry?
Of course, because see, where in the older time, like for matrimonial alliances were not only for friendly political alliance, and when a princess or there was alliances, it was not just a wedding of people or alliances, but the princess or the queens would get the whole area of people who would serve them, the kind of craftsmen, because they were very attached, or they had their inclination. So we do find that the princesses either invited, or they had with them, they invited their own karigars or the craftsmen to recreate the pattern that they desired. So once they come, and once it is they become popular with the kind of jewelry, so of course they further got encouragement and patronage. So that's how it happened. And not only in jewelry, in architecture as well, in architecture, painting, and many other things.
Thank you. Thank you for answering all the questions. We have a lot of positive comments coming in the feedback.
Thank you.
So I have also included a link, a feedback form link in the chat, and I request everyone to fill it up because it will help us improve ourselves. And Mr. Shabnam Jain says, wonderful, insightful presentation. Thank you, Dr. Nafisa.
Thank
and,
you.
And Meena Sachdeva has also said that it was a wonderful presentation. So I guess the feedback form would be good if everyone fills it. And thank you, Dr. Nafisa. It was an interactive lecture, a very well prepared one, and I have the privilege to know you personally, and I've seen the struggle that an artist goes through. And I'm very proud and happy to see you scaling new heights. And now I will request Dildar Singh from our Department of English and Cultural Studies. Dildar, please unmute yourself. He will be giving you.
A very good evening, madam.
Good evening.
Thank you, Dr. Nafisa Sayyed, for accepting our proposal to deliver a lecture to us. It was a wonderful lecture. You not just informed the many techniques involved in making and producing jewelry, but you also briefed about the minute details. I think by now we all will be able to recognize while just having a look at the jewelry. Ma'am, I would like to also thank the Alumni Association who proposed this idea of having such lectures. So you are invited, and I would like to thank Madam Sonia, Madam, for hosting this event and for dealing with all the technicalities involved in managing this event. And also thanks to the Dean, Alumni Association, Punjab University, Professor Deepti Gupta. Ma'am, as you said that purer the gold, brighter the enabling. So indeed, your lecture was full of brightness, and we have the idea that how pure you must be, your work, your hard work you put into this. We are highly thankful to you, madam, and we are also thankful to the dear audience for being wonderful spectators today. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, Dildar Singh. Thank you for the wonderful vote of thanks. Dr. Nafisa, we wish you success and happiness and look forward to having more webinars with you. And I would also like to take this opportunity to thank our Dean, Professor Deepti Gupta, because without her, we won't be here today. She has always encouraged and motivated us, and also to have webinars on totally a variety of topics. And this was also a different and refreshing topic. So, and all our participants, thank you for being such a wonderful audience. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. I've sent the link at the beginning of the chat, and please give us your feedback. With your permission, now should I end the meeting? Dr. Nafisa, would you like to say something?
Yeah, I would like to thank everyone for attending the webinar, and definitely Punjab University Alumni Association, Deepti ma'am and Sonia for organizing the webinar, and it was definitely great being here, and thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you. Okay, now I will end the meeting.